and I guarantee you you're in for a special treat tonight. Our speaker, Andrew Lazo, first came to research at the Wade Center over 20 years ago. It was 1998, right? And he's been a valued friend of this place ever since. We're delighted this time to welcome him with his wife, Kristen, who's here, who is also a well-known and established writer in her own right. Since, once you know Andrew, he's your friend. That's just how it is. And we're grateful for that. A gifted speaker, writer, and scholar on C.S. Lewis and the Inklings, Andrew is co-editor with Marianne Femister, and Marianne's here tonight. There you are. They've worked together to edit a really wonderful volume called Mere Christians: Inspiring Stories of Encounters with C.S. Lewis. In partnership with the Wade, Andrew has transcribed and edited C.S. Lewis's first spiritual autobiography called Early Prose Joy. It was published in volume 30 of our Journal 7. You are welcome to come and read it here in the reading room. We also still have back issues available if you're interested in owning it. If you like Surprised by Joy, you owe it to yourself to take a look at this. There's so much of significance, but one special thing is that Andrew used this manuscript as a way of correcting a previously accepted date of Lewis's conversion to theism. So I don't know if he'll touch on that at all tonight, but you'll have a chance in Q&A to ask him some things. Currently teaching at Houston Christian High School, Andrew speaks regularly about Lewis in Texas, throughout the U.S., as well as overseas. The subject tonight is Till We Have Faces. That's it's a beautiful book, but too little known, and I'm delighted that Andrew's doing more work on it to introduce people to it. In fact, he's been working on this novel for 12 years, doing research, writing, and teaching. And all of this work on Till We Have Faces, Andrew believes he has uncovered many of the reasons why C.S. Lewis himself referred to this novel as far and away my best book. The lecture tonight will unfold for us a number of key aspects of the mythic beauty of C.S. Lewis's myth Retold. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Lazo as he speaks on C.S. Lewis and the Myth of Love, unveiling the mysteries of Till We Have Faces. Andrew?
It's a difficult thing indeed to speak in a room of one's betters, and I can hardly think of a better room than this. One of the first times I got to speak about Lewis in an academic setting, I was at Belmont College for the Past Watchful Dragons conference, and a number of folks who had never picked up books by C.S. Lewis were in the room because they were friends of mine and they lived in Nashville, and then Bruce Edwards, who has since passed to glory, was in the room as well, and so that's a crowd for you. I have been blessed to spend a week here researching at the Wade Center, doing some work on Joy Davidman, about whom you'll hear in a few moments. And then one of the unique properties of coming to the Wade Center is when you ask to borrow a first edition of Till We Have Faces, they give you the first edition owned by Mary Willis Shelbourne of Letters to an American Lady fame. And so I'll read to you from the American First Edition. I am old now and have not much to fear from the anger of gods. I have no husband nor child, nor hardly even a friend through whom they can hurt me. My body, this lean carrion that still has to be washed and fed and have clothes hung about it daily with so many changes, they may kill as soon as they please. The succession is provided for. My crown passes to my nephew. Being, for all these reasons, free from fear, I will write in this book what no one who has happiness would dare to write. I will accuse the gods, especially the god who lives in the gray mountain. That is, I will tell all he has done to me from the very beginning, as if I were making my complaint of him before a judge. But there is no judge between gods and men, and the God of the mountain will not answer me. Till We Have Faces is a maddening and mysterious work. How many of you have had that difficult pleasure of reading this book? How many of you have gone through what I call the Till We Have Faces whiplash? You kind of go to Till We Have Faces at the end after having done Narnia and Great Divorce and Screwtape, and you're wanting some more Lewis. And there's a nice big one, over 300 pages. I'll get into it, and then, right? Right over. Am I the only one? Okay. Maddening. And then you have this quote, far and away my best book. He says it twice. Far and away my best book. That much better than Screwtape, than Mere Christianity, than the Oxford History of English Literature in the 16th century, excluding drama? Oh, hell. By the way, it's a glorious read. I finally, at Jerry Root's urging, finally picked it up and read it. That's where Puddleglum comes from. It's there, buried in the pages. Far and away my best book. But my one great failure, he says, an absolute flop, a flop d'estime, an estimable flop. The best I've written, my one great failure with the critics and with the public. When you read it, it seems to strike, and strike deeply. If your experience is at all like mine, you know that there is something serious and significant going on, but it's almost as if it echoes from the next room. There's something huge and important here, but it's so hard to track down. And you read it and you reread it, and what I find is that many people come to this book extremely compelled, and it becomes their favorite, but they can't begin to enunciate why. But they know that there's something here. I think that Michael Ward is on to something, and in fact, much of my research comes inspired by him unlocking some of the secrets of the Narnia books. If you don't know the works of Dr. Michael Ward, incredible Planet Narnia, he discovered why there are 7 Chronicles of Narnia, and I'll let you find out for yourself. He says of those books and of story, a good story has its own atmosphere, its own breathing. You know you are in another world. If we missed the fact that there's another atmosphere, he tells us that the children begin to grow stronger when they just breathe the Narnian air, all the more so when they take in the breath of Aslan. It's like an echo from a far-off country, and it sounds like no other. Ward clearly points out that this kappa element in literature, this atmospheric uniqueness comes, and the inner meaning, Lewis says, is carefully hidden. If you didn't get Till We Have Faces, good. You're reading it right. Lewis hid it. And my working assumption on doing work on Till We Have Faces is that if Lewis hid the 7 planets in the 7 Chronicles when he was still a tutor at Magdalen and had not much leisure, how much more would he carefully craft in his last fiction a secret plan or plot? And I found the secrets. So let me give you 4 keys for those of you taking notes. 4 keys to figure out why this really is far and away his best book, but is one great disappointment with the critics. When I was asked by the C.S. Lewis Foundation to teach anything in the summer of 2006, I was doing a college course. They said, pick a couple books by Lewis and teach them, and then follow up students for the rest of the quarter and have them write a paper. I said immediately, I want to write about Till We Have Faces and the Four Loves, and I didn't even know why. I just sensed that somehow there was a connection between them. And like many academics, I wrote the abstract months before, forgot the abstract until I got on the plane, and I wrote the paper on the plane. Am I the only one who has ever, can I get a witness? Yeah. On the plane, as I reread Till We Have Faces, all of a sudden, my knocking at the door cracked open. I am old now and have not much to fear from the anger of gods. I have no husband nor child, nor hardly a friend through whom they can hurt me. I am free from the fear of the anger of gods, Orual says. After she sees the god's house, she says, I was in great fear. She says, you say you think that you can prove him a god and set me free from the fears that sicken my heart. Wait, I'm free from fear? I have not much to fear from the anger of gods, and yet these are just two examples of how she talks about the terrors and the fears of God that she has all throughout the book. She's free from fear. She fears him all the time. She's lying to you. She's lying to you. No, surely not. Yes, absolutely so. At the beginning of book 2, she says, since I cannot mend the book, I must add to it. To leave it as it was would be to die perjured. What's perjury? It's a legal lie. I know so much more than I did about the woman who wrote it. What began the change was the very writing itself. Let no one lightly set about such a work. Memory, once waked, will play the tyrant. I found I must set down, for I was speaking as before judges. Wait, I thought you just said there were no judges. Speaking as before judges and must not lie. Passions and thoughts of my own which I had clean forgotten. In order to get any spiritual insight from Orual, the narrator of the book, you have to take her lies and flip them right side up. She complains bitterly. If they had an honest intention to guide us, why is their guidance not plain? Psyche could speak plain when she was 3. How do you tell me the gods have not come so far? If the gods really wanted me to know, why didn't they tell us so? And I don't know about you, but it's that kvetching, angry spirit against the gods where I go, yeah, why don't they really make it plain? Right? She's angry. But they make it as plain as we can stand. In order to make that statement true, you have to flip it right side up. Orual is Screw Tape. Another book where you can only get spiritual wisdom by taking the lie and flipping it right side up. It's not the first time that Lewis has lied to us through the mouth of his first-person narrator. He's doing it again. And that's what came knocking at my door there on the plane flight. One of the keys to understanding Till We Have Faces is to realize that Orual is lying to us. And the sooner you see that, the better it gets. Now you'll notice that very kind of postmodern deconstructionist parenthesis that I put on the title. Unveiling, parenthesis, unveiling the mysteries of Till We Have Faces. And I'll get to that in a while. I think that Lewis was purposely veiling the mysteries of Till We Have Faces, but the parentheses are there for a reason. In this book, more than any other, Orual, who lies through her teeth, cannot help but let the truth seep out. And that's what you see in the parentheses. If you read Till We Have Faces and you look at Orual's parenthetical asides, they are full of verifiable facts. Usually quite material, quite everyday facts, right? Like when the boy slips and Trom stabs him and she says, I have smoothed over the pavement since. If you look at the parentheticals, she can't help but tell some truth because she is lying so much. Don't underestimate the statement at the beginning of book 2. To leave it as it was would be to die perjured. She knows she's lying. Go through that book and don't trust the narrator, or trust her to tell you whatever truths that she wants to. This idea of flipping, Lewis does all the time. It's characteristic of Lewis. It's medieval of Lewis. Lewis flips things all the time. And he usually flips things with myth. Lewis loved turning things upside down so that we could see them right side up. It happens all the time, especially when he deals with myth. Do you remember Eustace? There once was a boy named Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Let's leave Eustace aside for a moment and talk about Narcissus. Do you remember the Narcissus myth? Narcissus was a young hero who was so beautiful that when he saw his image in the river, he fell in love with how beautiful he was, and he died because he couldn't tear himself away to eat. Oh my gosh, he didn't have meal delivery service back then. He was so beautiful that he fell in love with himself and so died. Eustace fell asleep on a dragon's hoard thinking dragonish thoughts. And the ugly, self-serving, self-covetous craving in his heart got projected outward, and he woke up a dragon. The ugliness that was on his insides turned into his outsides. And you remember that scene. You know, he sees a dragon paw over here, and he sees a dragon paw over there, and he sees the smoke, and he's running away from the dragon, and he's actually the dragon. And then he comes to the pool. And he looks in the pool, and he despairs because he is a dragon. He's ugly, sees how ugly he is, falls in a healthy hatred of his ugliness, and so lives. Abandons himself and comes to Aslan and lets Aslan dig himself out of himself. Remember? This kind of chiastic flipping happens all the time. Chiasm is the Greek term. It's an X. It's one thing goes up while one thing goes down. Lewis is always flipping things up for down. It happens everywhere. We don't have enough time. We'd be here for 7 hours, and I'd still be talking. You'd be sleeping, like most of my students, but I'd still be going. We don't have time for all of the examples that I have. But he flips this all the time, which is what you have to do with Or You All if you want to understand Till We Have Faces. Pretend that she's Screw Tape. And when she says something about the gods in book 1, flip it right side up. And you'll get some good and applicable spiritual wisdom. That happened instantaneously for me. And then remember what she said, I am old now and have not much to fear from the anger of gods. I have no husband, no friend, nor husband, no child, nor hardly a friend who can hurt me, or through whom they can hurt me. What, please, are the 4 loves? Do you remember? Storge, meaning affection. Philia, meaning friendship. Eros, romantic love. And agape, divine love. I had no husband, Eros. No child, Storge. No friend, Philia. Through whom the gods could hurt me, which is the opposite of agape, or divine love. She flips all 4 loves. Lazo, you're just making it up, is what most of my students say when I come up with this real English majory sort of explanation. So let me read to you from page 22. This is Or You All speaking of Psyche and how much she loved Psyche. Watch this. I wanted to be a wife so that I could have been her real mother. I wanted to be a boy so that she could be in love with me. I wanted her to be my full sister instead of my half-sister. I wanted her to be a slave so I could set her free and make her rich. Did you hear the 4 loves? He's writing the 4 loves on all the pages of Till We Have Faces, and we missed it, which is why he wrote this book 5 years later. We missed it in fiction. He set it out in prose. We'll get to the dedication and the and the copyright holder in a little bit. If you know the story and start to read it through the echo of those four loves, you will see that Bardia was her philia, her friend, and she treated her friend who loved her with philia with hidden eros. She betrayed him. She betrays philia. She doesn't love him in a friendly way. She loved him as a secret lover. Oh, Bardia, never to once say to you that I loved you. You don't do that to your friend. Or if you do, you're not a very good friend. The fox, who was her friend, she should have set free and sent back to the Greek lands. She doesn't. She betrays philia with him. But the clearest picture is that of Ansit, Bardia's wife, Bardia's widow. She goes to Ansit, and they're angry at each other. You had more Bardia than I did. Well, you had more Bardia than I did. You had him all day. Well, you had him all night. And she said, could you possibly be jealous of this? And she pulls off her veil and shows Ansit her ugly face. But in addition to her face, Ansit sees that she loved Bardia. And she said, oh, you too? Remember what Lewis said of Arthur Greaves when they sat beside a copy of Myths of the Norsemen? Remember what he says of friendship? The characteristic statement of friendship is what? You too? I thought I was the only one. Friendship recognizes each other when we love the same things or consider the same questions important. And it is exactly that phrase that Ansit said, oh, you too. They could have bonded as friends over the fact that they both had eros for Bardia, and that the other one robbed them of him. She betrays friendship. Does she betray eros? Well, obviously, she betrays the eros that was shared between Bardia and Ansit. She betrays clearly the eros that was shared between Psyche and the god of the mountain, who is Eros, right? Remember that the fox says, oh, Ungit is like Aphrodite. If Ungit is Aphrodite, then the son of Aphrodite is Eros, right? The Greek is Aphrodite and Eros. The Roman is Venus and Cupid, right? Cupid, Eros, marries Psyche, and she stops that marriage from going on, doesn't she? Her own denial of her love for Bardia is itself a betrayal of Eros. She had Eros and never spoke it. She betrays Philia. She betrays Eros. Surely she doesn't betray Storgi. Ha-ha! Remember at the end when the eunuch comes in and says, oh, Retold, she came to me because she was lonely. She used to say to me, first of all, Orual loved me much. Then the fox came and she loved me little. Then the baby came and she loved me not at all. Orual betrayed her love, her storgi, her affection, her family love that she should have given to Retold. Now, Retold was, an airhead and spiteful and mean of her own right. I mean, she was hard to love, but I'm sure that she was the only person hard to love in this room. Wait. She betrayed Storgi. She betrayed the fox, who she called grandfather, but didn't treat him in a grandfatherly way. She betrayed Agape, or the closest thing that came to Agape in that pre-incarnate society. Doris Myers, I think, correctly places this about 300 or 400 years BC. She betrays the gods who love her, and that's one of the great secrets to Till We Have Faces that you didn't know because you fell for the lie. The gods love her. The gods love her. Like in the 5 sonnets, booming at the pain for hours, thinking that that's the way to reach the flowers. The gods love her, and she lies about it. It's a lie I tell myself all the time. God can't really love me. And Lewis knew this well too. He calls it the intolerable compliment that God actually could love us. Those are your first keys. Take those 2 books. If you want to understand Till We Have Faces, reread Screwtape so you get a taste for that flipping. Reread the 4 Loves. And then reread Till We Have Faces. Yes, I just assigned you a whole bunch of reading. but you're at the Wade Center. All of that stuff you need is right over there. Here's a second key. I got permission today from the wonderful photographer and scholar Lancia Smith to use her beautiful picture of these first editions because they wouldn't give me a key to the stacks downstairs. They knew me too well. Owen Barfield points to an essential unity in all of Lewis's writings. Have you ever read a phrase in Lewis and it pops up in a letter, then it pops up in an essay, and then it pops up in a Narnia, and then it pops up in a scholarly? It's like there's echoing all around. And if you do that marvelous thing that Alistair McGrath did, which was read all of Lewis's works chronologically, you start hearing these echoes all the time. Do you get that sense of a unity in Lewis? Whether you pick up early or late, you hear these phrases again and again and again. It points to an essential, purposeful unity in all of Lewis's works, which you have known and through your reading experience, no matter how much or little of Lewis you've read. But let me suggest to you that that unity is clearly, most perfectly demonstrated until we have faces, because I'm apt to make a rash statement. I usually do it with Jerry Root in the room so that I can see how far I'm wrong. And over the years, I've managed to at least hold my own in an argument or two with Jerry Root. I overstate. I'm an extremist. I overstate my case, and then I jump off into the deep end without any arm floaties, and I try to make my way to the side of the pool. I'm meeting with Jerry tonight. Pray for me now and in the hour of my death. Amen. Every book that Lewis wrote is Until We Have Faces. Go ahead, write it down. Yeah, we're going to be fighting about this one for years. Time does not suffice, but this is where I get lost. My wife and I had so much fun putting this together. This, by the way, is part of a 4-part series of lectures that I've been giving at Houston Baptist University. And what I decided is, because I like to talk more than I like to write, I decided that I would outline each chapter, and I have 14 chapters of the book all outlined, and then I would talk through the outline, record it, transcribe it, and that's draft 1 of the book. Thank you very much. You're my book proposal. Thank you. It's stunning. Every one of Lewis's books is Until We Have Faces. I will only give you a few examples. We'll keep fighting. Jerry will certainly find examples that I haven't thought of yet, and I will say, I don't know, and then I'll come back to him, and then maybe I'll stand a chance. Owen Barfield said, somehow what Lewis thought about everything was secretly present in what he said about anything. What Lewis thought about everything was secretly present in what he said about anything. I believe that that is not just hyperbole. I believe that that's true. And if that's true, where so more than in far and away his best book, Till We Have Faces. Let me give you another example where Lewis tips his hand that happens. When he publishes Transpositions, an early collection of essays, he says, these addresses seem to repeat, though they really anticipated, sentences of mine which have already appeared in print. He gave the talks, and they anticipated things that came out later, and then Transpositions came out after the things that he had published. An essential unity to Lewis's thought that's contained in all of his writings. Okay? You can expect Lewis to echo. And where so more than Until We Have Faces? Nowhere. I'll give you just a couple of examples. In A Grief Observed, written, of course, about Joy Davidman, he said, how many bubbles of mine she pricked. You have to pay attention to those words in Lewis. I soon learned not to talk rot to her unless I did it for the sheer pleasure of being exposed and laughed at. And there's another red-hot jab. Jabbing, pricking, swordplay, by the way. And if you've read Joy Davidman's poems, she said, I gave him a sword named Joy on Christmas Day, and he pricked his finger on it. He cut his finger on it. A jab, the swordplay. By the way, Orual was romantically in love with Bardia, and Bardia extended philia to Orual. Orual had eros for Bardia. Bardia had philia for Orual. and they had a sword fight. Joy Davidman was in love with Lewis when they wrote this book together. That's a picture of them. How many bubbles of mine she pricked? Here's what Orual says. The gods never send us this invitation to delight so readily or so strongly as when they are preparing some new agony. We are their bubbles. They blow us up big before they prick us. That's 1955. In 1963, Lewis uses that same word to prick the bubble. Let's go back to Eustace. How does he get out of his lion skin? Not in that terrible way that you see in the movie when he scrapes the sand and poof. And then what's up with the 7 swords for the elven kings underneath the sky or whatever, and whatever. Eustace digs out of his skin how many times? 3 times. He digs out of his skin after looking in the mirror. Orual in the vision in book 2 with Trom the king looks in the mirror, and they dig down in the pillar room and down in the pillar room and down in the pillar room 3 times. It's a digging into the psyche. It's an exploration of the soul. It's a fruitlessness of self-examination because we cannot be examined well until we will face the gods. And that's what happens next. That threefold digging out. And remember what Aslan says? You must let me do it. And it's the gods who undress Orual as well. Ransom in Meldalorn, surrounded by the Eldila, he perceived gradually that the place was full of Eldilas, the end out of the silent planet. The lights or suggestions of light, which yesterday had been scattered over the island, were now all congregated in this one spot and were all stationary or very faintly moving. The sky, no less than the earth, was full of them. The visible Malacandrians were but the smallest part of the silent consistory which surrounded him. The angels, right? The spirits. He might, when time came, be pleading his cause before thousands or before millions, rank behind rank about him, and rank above rank over his head, the creatures that had never yet seen man, and whom man could not see, were waiting for the trial to begin. That's out of the silent planet. Here's what Orual says. All round me, below me, up to the very edges of the stone I stood on, there surged a sort of unquiet darkness. But soon my eyes grew able to see things in that half-light. The darkness was alive. It was a great assembly, all staring upon me, and I uplifted on my perch above their heads. Never in peace or war have I seen so vast a concourse. There were tens of thousands of them, all silent, every face watching me as she goes to her trial. Reflections on the Psalms. For the mystics, this is written after till we have faces. For the mystics, God is the bridegroom of the individual soul. For the pagans, the god is the bridegroom of the mother goddess, the earth, but his union with her also makes fertile the whole tribe and its livestock, so that in a sense he is their bridegroom too. Okay, the mystics have the bridegroom and the bride, but the bride is also Mother Earth, and there's all of this stuff and this fertility. Psyche, by the way, Suke, any Greek scholars in the room? Suke means soul, right? The human soul. Psyche is married to the bridegroom. The gods flow in and out of one another. A voice comes and says, actually Trom holds her up to the mirror and says, "Who are you?" And she says, "I am Ungit." And she wails and despairs. I am Ungit, because she thinks the gods are cruel. It's not that the gods are cruel. Her own cruelty and selfishness she projects on the gods who have been trying to love her for the length of a lifetime. But Orual is Psyche too. You are Psyche too. You are Ungit too. The gods flow in and out of one another. The bridegroom shifts, and it's the brute, it's the shadow brute, it's the bridegroom, it's the son of the god, it's the mountain himself. There's all of this shiftiness. He talks about that in the Psalms. Mere Christianity. Everything which really needs to be done in our souls can be done only by God. Psyche had impossible tasks to complete, and she couldn't complete them because another bore nearly all the anguish. Psyche is clearly a Christ figure, but now it's Orual who is the Christ figure, and you can hear the echo of mere Christianity there. I'm just giving you a couple of examples. Mere Christianity, again, it's to the point where I just open a book, any of Lewis's books, and don't turn more than 2 or 3 pages where I hear a clear echo of Till We Have Faces. And so if Jerry gets me on one, I just haven't found it yet. Mere Christianity again. The real test of being in the presence of God is that you either forget about yourself altogether or see yourself as a small, dirty object. It is better to forget about yourself altogether. Remember that the great sin, Book 3, Chapter 8, the great sin is pride. And the trouble for all of those people on the bus ride to heaven is that they won't give up themselves. In the end, there are only 2 kinds of people. Those people who say to God, thy will be done, and those people to whom God says, thy will be done. You will either say yes to him or no. You will either go to heaven or go to hell. And if you say yes to him and no to you, you'll go to heaven. And if you say no to him and yes to you, you'll go to hell. It's just Lewis. Small, dirty object. Read your complaint, said the judge. I looked at the roll in my hand and saw at once that it was not the book I had written. It couldn't be. It was far too small and too old, a little shabby, crumpled thing. Like 12 words that she had been repeating over and over and over again. Don't even get me started on the great divorce. Remember Pam, who lost her son Michael? I don't believe in a God who keeps mother and son apart. I believe in a God of love. No one has had a right to come between me and my son, not even God. Tell him that to his face. I want my boy, and I mean to have him. He is mine, do you understand? Mine, mine, mine forever. Or you all. You stole her to make her happy, did you? Why, every wheedling, smiling, catfoot rogue who lures away another man's wife or slave or dog might have done the same. Dog now, that's very much to the purpose. I'll thank you to let me feed my own. It needed no tidbits from your table. Did you ever remember whose the girl was? She was mine. Mine. Do you not know what the word means? Mine. You're thieves and seducers. This is where you have to take Orual and flip her right side up. Do the gods not know what the word mine means? God is the only one that can possess and set free at the same time. The gods are the only one that can possess a soul. Christ is the only one that can hold you and let you go at the same time. Do you not know what the word mine means? They know it all too well. And the maker of the universe considered equality with God not a thing to be grasped, but took on a form even of a servant. He poured out himself like an offering. Orual does the very opposite. Flip it upside down and you got some good devotional advice right there. Don't even get me started on Surprised by Joy. Oh, for pity's sake. Quickly. It's what I've called in this work that Marge showed you, Lewis's autobiographical compulsion. We have discovered not just Pilgrim's Regress and Surprised by Joy. There are 5 or 6 autobiographies. Surprised by Joy we knew, Pilgrim's Regress we knew of, Surprised by Joy we knew of, but thanks to me being poorly raised and having bad manners, I come to the Wade and sit as close as I can to the archivist's desk so that I can eavesdrop on any conversation that Laura has. I'm nosy and badly raised. And they were discussing this manuscript that seemed to be an early draft of Surprised by Joy, and I said, can I have a look? And at the beginning, it is Surprised by Joy, but at the end, it's Pilgrim's Regress, and so I transcribed it and found Lewis's autobiography of his conversion to theism, which did not happen in Trinity term of 1929. Thank you very much. It happened between June 1st and June 9th of 1930, and I proved it. In fact, I had a conversation with Alistair McGrath, who suggested this in his biography, and I showed him a place in the manuscript which clearly was from February 3rd, 1930, and in typical British overstatement, Alistair said, well, there it is then. Michael Ward emailed me a couple of years later, and he said, I thought you'd like to know that Alistair name-checked you at the University Church of St. Mary the Virgin. As American scholar Andrew Lazo has discovered by other means, early prose joy, written in 1930 or 1931. A poetic version that Don King has 100 lines of called I Will Write Down. Pilgrim's Regress in 1932. Surprised by Joy in 1953. But if you read Daimer is that quest for joy as well. It's that self-same quest. And if you're going to go backwards into the pre-Christian poetry, let's go forwards into the post-Christian fiction and say Till We Have Faces is a story of a spiritual autobiography of somebody looking for joy. And if Till We Have Faces, perhaps maybe we can edge a grief observed in there as part of Lewis's autobiographical compulsion. He could not shut up about himself. He's speaking about himself all the time. All the time. He's a character in the science fiction trilogy. He's speaking in the first person Until We Have Faces and in Screwtape Letters. He's everywhere. And he's wanting to tell the story, but I think Until We Have Faces, he finally gets it right. Because he didn't care all that much about joy. But we'll get to that in a moment. It's an autobiographical compulsion. And it's an arc that spans his whole writing life. And you can hear echoes of Surprised by Joy and early prose joy, all of his joy stories in Surprised by Joy. It's everywhere. You can pick a book off the shelf. I'll keep you up way longer than you want to stay up. I haven't even touched on all of the Narnias. I haven't touched on Lucy, who sees because she believes, and Susan, who won't allow herself to see in the same way that Orual will not allow herself to see. By the way, not for nothing, but when does Orual see the palace that she denies? When? She gets up in the middle of the night, she goes to the river, she kneels down and she takes a drink, and she looks up and she sees the palace. Vision is connected with faith in Lewis. That's why Lucy, Lux Lucas, the bright, the clear one, the seeing one, Saint Lucy, the patron saint of the blind, the one with her eyes. Lucy sees because she believes. You believe and have faith because you're willing to humble themselves. You can see because you can see beyond yourself. Susan can't get over herself and she can't see. She's the last one to see Aslan, except for the dear little friend, Trumpkin. Lucy sees him right away. Susan says, the thing is, I did see you, or I could have if I had let myself. I could have seen you if I had let myself. She can't get over herself. Orual sees the palace of the god when she gets a drink, when she kneels. And remember what Lewis said, the body needs to pray too. That we are physical as well as spiritual. And when she assumes the position of humility, she's granted vision. And not till then. Don't even get me started on Susan. A Curious Courtship, the literary love life of Joy Davidman and C.S. Lewis. I've read all of the scholars. All of the best works. And I admire many of these men and women, and many of them are my friends, but they kind of get it wrong because nobody knows that there was a double author to Till We Have Faces. Joy Davidman was its co-author, was its collaborator. The weekend that they put the memorial stone in Westminster Abbey, I got a chance to spend some time at the kilns with Douglas Gresham. And I propounded my theory about what's going on, and he said there was a double author to that book. I've had correspondence with Lyle Dorset. He said either George Sayer or Owen Barfield or both told him the same thing, that Lewis wanted to put her name on the authorship of Till We Have Faces. But he said no, or she said no, I just helped him write more like himself. But you remember what happened. This is what Joy says in a letter to Bill Gresham, her husband. Jack has started a new fantasy for grown-ups. His methods of work amaze me. One night he was lamenting that he couldn't get a good idea for a book. We kicked a few ideas around till one came to life. Then we had another whiskey each and bounced it back and forth between us. The next day, without further planning, he wrote the first chapter. I read it and made some criticisms. Feels quite like old times. He did it over and went on with the next. What I'd give to have his energy. Though I can't write 1/10 as well as Jack, I can tell him how to write more like himself. He is now 3/4 of the way through his new book, What I'd Give for That Energy, and he says he finds my advice indispensable. Well, it's a suitable gift for a woman. The scholars give perhaps a dozen pages to Lewis's or to Joy Davidman's slight influence or some influence on Till We Have Faces. Lewis himself, when he writes Till We Have Faces, uses a metaphor that he sometimes uses when he writes books. He talks about being very much with book, pregnant with his book. As a matter of fact, at one point he includes in a letter a prayer to Juno, the goddess of childbirth. Let me suggest to you, if C.S. Lewis was pregnant with Till We Have Faces, Joy Davidman knocked him up. Sorry. Not for this did you build this auditorium. She helped him to conceive the book. And she helped midwife that book. She helped him to write it and rewrite it. And he wasn't much of a rewriter, but he respected her opinion. There was a double author to that book. Lewis got married to Joy Davidman in 1956, and then, he doesn't get it right the first time. He converts to theism, and then he has to convert to Christianity. He marries her once, and then he has to marry her again. He marries her in 1956, just purely to extend his British citizenship to her, right? Yeah. And then marries again at the bedside when he thinks that he's going to lose her. Okay? Lewis admits that he's in love with her in 1957. But I've been doing my work at that table in there, and I've been talking with people, and let me suggest to you that C.S. Lewis fell in love with Joy Davidman long before he admitted to himself that he was in love with Joy Davidman. I spent some time with Larry Crabb, the psychologist and author. He's come to some of the Lewis's conferences, and it's been such a joy to get to know Larry. And I said, Larry, can a man like Lewis, who is so afraid of the emotional ups and downs of his father and so tormented by the trauma of his childhood loss of his mother and all the other emotional things, could he compartmentalize in such a way that he would not admit to himself that he was in love? And Larry said it happens all the time. Lewis fell in love with her in the spring of 1955. I spent a few days with Steve Beebe in Texas, and we combed through all of the biographies and all of the accounts, and the nearest that we can find from all of the letters, even letters that I was reading today that have never been published. Lewis falls in love with Joy Davidman in 1955. Chad and Eva Walsh in the summer of 1955 said matrimony was in the air, although I don't think either of them knew it. We've discovered her poems, and she certainly was falling in love with, or altogether in love with, C.S. Lewis very early, 1951, 52, before she even met him in person. I had a chance to spend some time with Bishop Simon Barrington Ward, who sat at table at Magdalen College, Cambridge, with Jack every day. And he said that in the spring of 1955, when Joy would come in, Lewis would brighten up considerably. Everybody that I know, if you look at the letters and the dates, Lewis fell in love with her, although he didn't admit it to himself. He fell in love with her in the spring of 1955. You know what they were doing in the spring of 1955? They were writing Till We Have Faces. If you want to understand this book, you better get to know Joy Davidman, because her fingerprints are all over that book. And you can hear these echoes where Lewis really sounds like a woman. You can hear these passages that surely she had a hand in writing. Time does not afford me the opportunity to read you a section of her novel, Weeping Bay. But there is a passage in Weeping Bay, published in 1951, that Lewis steals and puts in Till We Have Faces. How could they be such good friends and then be in love? Well, in The Four Loves, Lewis says, when the two people who thus discover that they are on the same secret road of friendship are of different sexes, the friendship which arises between them will may pass in the first half hour into erotic love. Indeed, unless they are physically repulsive to each other, they weren't, or unless one or both already loves elsewhere, they didn't, it is almost certain to do so sooner or later. Lewis is describing how he and Joy Davidman fell in love. I wish I had time to read to you Joy Davidman's marvelous poems, love poems written to C.S. Lewis. They're filled with echoes of how frustrated she was, and you can almost hear the voice of Orual. And there are 6 poems where she talks about how Lewis doesn't love her because she's a brunette and Jack loves blondes. She got a poem called Gentlemen Prefer, for pity's sake. And she says, let me get you an hour on my bed, and you'll forget the color of the hair on my head. She saw past his frozen and pious adolescence, and she went out and got him. And by the way, she was a brunette. Other women in Lewis's life were a blonde. Orual's a brunette who hates Retold for her blonde hair. Right? Just grasping at straws, read the poetry and come back and talk to me. The Four Loves. Actually, not in this edition, but in the American edition, first edition of The Four Loves. The copyright is not C.S. Lewis. The copyright of The Four Loves is Helen Joy Lewis. The dedication of The Four Loves is to Chad Walsh, the man who encouraged Joy Davidman to get in touch with C.S. Lewis, the man who helped Joy and Jack get together, the man who, with his wife, enjoyed many times with Lewis and Joy Davidman as they were falling in love together. And let me suggest to you, and now Doug has told me, and I still haven't gotten permission to look at the contract, but Doug has told me that the reason why his mother is listed as the author of The Four Loves is for financial reasons, so that they would have some further financial support. I think Doug and David Gresham were doing fine on the royalties end there. But let me suggest to you that Joy Davidman is the author of The Four Loves and C.S. Lewis. She was his truest friend. He said, we would have been always together. Had we not married, we would have been always together and created a scandal. She got him in a way that I don't think Warney did. I don't think Tolkien did. I don't think Williams did. I think she saw him. And I think that's some of the blowback that we get about her. I think that other people were jealous as to how much of Lewis she got, because he presented a different face to all of these friends. She's the author of Friendship. She's the author of Eros in Him. He said, I was surprised to find in my 60s the happiness that had passed me by in my 20s. She certainly was the author of the erotic in C.S. Lewis, in Eros. He fell in love with her when she was about to die. He says, Thanatos, death, proves a great rival, but he found somebody that he could lavish his charity on. And he was a sucker for charity. For caritas, he gave away so much of his money, and he certainly did love her unconditionally. She also brought him family. She cleaned up the house. She brought him some sons. She brought him Storgi. Joy Davidman is the author of The Four Loves and C.S. Lewis. I have to finish. Listen to this. The fox says of Orual, I taught her as men teach a parrot to say lies of the poets, and ungets a false image. Often when he was teaching me to write in Greek, the fox would say, child, to say the thing you really mean, the whole of it, and nothing more or less or other than what you really mean, that's the whole art and joy of words. And here's what Orual finally confesses to Psyche. Oh, goddess, I said, never again will I call you mine. But all there is of me shall be yours. Alas, you know what it's worth. I never wished you well, never had one selfless thought of you. I was a craver. She parroted what the fox told her. The fox taught her Greek, and she parroted it well, and she never had a selfless thought of Psyche. You know where I'm going. Thanks be to Phil Keggy, who put it to music so that I could pretend like I memorized this poem. As Joy Davidman is dying, Lewis composes this poem to her called As the Ruin Falls. All this is flashy rhetoric about loving you. I never had a selfless thought since I was born. I am mercenary and self-seeking through and through. I want God, you, all friends merely to serve my turn. Peace, reassurance, pleasure are the goals I seek. I cannot crawl 1 inch outside my proper skin. I talk of love. A scholar's parrot may talk Greek, but self-imprisoned always end where I begin. Only that now you have taught me, but how late my lack. I see the chasm. And everything you are was making my heart into a bridge by which I might get back from exile and grow man. But now the bridge is breaking. For this I bless you as the ruin falls. The pains you give me are more precious than all other gains. Remember what Lewis says of divine love? He says the only place that we can be free from the dangers and perturbations of love is hell. Lewis didn't care that much about joy. Yeah, I'm going to fight with him about that one too. Let me suggest to you that one final key, the overarching underlying theme of Till We Have Faces and all of Lewis's works, the overarching underlying theme of Lewis is not joy, it's love. It's love. I said this to Doug. He says, I don't know many people in the whole world who know that everything Lewis wrote was all about love. This is the end of Surprised by Joy. But what, in conclusion of Joy? For that, after all, is what the story has mainly been about. To tell you the truth, the subject, joy, has lost nearly all interest for me since I became a Christian. I believe, if the thing were at all worth recording, that the old stab, the old bittersweet, has come to me as often and as sharply since my conversion as at any time of my life whatever. But I now know that the experience, considered as a state of my own mind, had never had the kind of importance I once gave it. It was valuable, joy. Joy was valuable only as a pointer to something other and outer. What, at last, can only be other and outer than joy? Love. By the way, Lewis says love is where we go out of ourselves to meet someone else. I have to pass by so much. Let me give you a little hint. Remember in the 6 times in Till We Have Faces where she refers to the last words of book 1, no answer? The gods will not answer us because they have no answer. And then she says, I ended my last book with the word no answer. The ink was hardly dry on the words no answer. He calls attention to the last words of book 1, no answer, again and again and again and again. Any good English teacher will tell you, any good English student or scholar will tell you, if he's calling attention to the last 2 words of book 1, we should probably pay attention to the first 2 words of book 1. And you know what those are? I am old now and have not much to fear from the anger of gods. The entirety of book 1 of Till We Have Faces is I am no answer. There's not a gospel tract that's clearer than that. I am no answer. I ended my first book with the words, no answer. I know now, Lord, while you utter no answer, you are yourself the answer. Before your face, questions die away. What other answer would suffice? Only words to be led out to battle against other words. Long did I hate you. Long did I fear you. I might. And then she writes something, bows her head and obscures the words, according to Arnhem. We cannot read them. And she dies. What did she write? Long did I hate you, long did I fear you, I might something. What did she write? Let me give you a hint. With Lewis, endings and beginnings, chiastic structure, starting and finishing, these are really key. Here's a clue at the end of The Last Battle, which was completed the same year as Till We Have Faces, published the same year as Till We Have Faces. At the end of The Last Battle, the talking animals come, and the ones who have been disobedient look at Aslan with a look of fear and hatred. And they go to the left and lose their ability to speak. But the animals who look at Aslan with love go to the right, into Aslan's country. Fear and hatred go to the left. Love, go to the right. Long did I hate you. Long did I fear you. I might what? 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 Love you. She bows her head to worship the God that she's been hating all of her life and presses the ink against her forehead. If you raised her up, you would see written on her head, on her face, if you will, you love. Love you. The overarching underlying theme of everything Lewis ever did was derived to push forward one purpose, and that is to help us to see clearly the love of God. He wants us to think clearly. He wants us to read clearly. He wants us to write clearly. He wants us to be like Lucy, the clear-eyed one, so that we can see the love of God. To develop a universal field theory of C.S. Lewis's mad work, but I'm going to try. I think Lewis wanted us to see the love of God. And that's why this is far and away his best book. So why did he hide it? In the fall of this year, after writing Till We Have Faces, Carl F.H. Henry, you know him better than I, the editor of Christianity Today, asks Lewis for more theological pieces, maybe apologetics, I don't know. Lewis says, I can't write your articles. My thought and talent, such as they are, now flow in different, though I think not less Christian channels, and I do not think I am at all likely to write more directly theological pieces. If I am now good for anything, it is for catching the reader unawares through fiction and symbol. I have done what I could in the way of frontal attacks, but he's still fighting. He's fighting from within us. He is that spy column inside of us, urging us to see clearly how angry we are at a God who really loves us, although with clenched teeth we will not let him nor admit it, but that will not stop him from loving you. Catching the reader unawares, keeping the secret. Why is Till We Have Faces so puzzling? Because our Lord did not open his mouth except to speak in parables, so that seeing they would not see and hearing they would not hear. And you know who he explains the parables to? The ones who come and ask him. We will look for him and we will find him when we seek him with all of our heart. When we will really engage our love. And much, much more than our own tawdry little love, when we will really engage with the love of the God who made the universe and the tree upon which he was hammered and died for us. This is the central reality of Lewis's life. And the reality of all of us too, if he has anything to say, and me as well. Let me end with this. Endings and beginnings, friends. Here's the end of the four loves. And with this, where a better book would begin, mine must end. I dare not proceed. God knows, not I, whether I have ever tasted this love. Perhaps I have only imagined the tasting. Those like myself, whose imagination far exceeds their obedience, are subject to a just penalty. We easily imagine conditions far higher than any we have really reached. If we describe what we have imagined, we may make others and make ourselves believe that we have really been there. And if I have only imagined it, is it a further delusion that even the imagining has at some moments made all other objects of desire, yes, even peace, even to have no more fears, look like broken toys and faded flowers, perhaps? Perhaps for many of us, all experience merely defines, so to speak, the shape of the gap where our love of God ought to be. It is not enough. It is something. If we cannot practice the presence of God, it is something to practice the absence of God. To become increasingly aware of our unawareness till we feel like men who should stand beside a great cataract and hear no noise, or like a man in a story who looks in a mirror and finds no face there. Or a man in a dream who stretches out his hand to visible objects and gets no sensation of touch. To know that one is dreaming is to be no longer perfectly asleep. But for news of the fully waking world, you must go to my betters. The overarching, underlying theme of all of it, and let me suggest that the reason that this book is so maddeningly mysterious is because it's the same kind of maddening mystery of the fact that God loves you. How can we live with that? But the only other question is, how can we live without it? Thank you. It's a long night. I've gone over time. I thank you for coming out in the middle of a busy day, in the middle of a long week, but if we have
Say thank you, and we do have time for questions. So Andrew's going to field his own questions, and Elaine's got the mic.
Oh, sorry. Oh no, save him for an hour for now.
No, Andrew, it was a delightful and pleasurable lecture. It was a joy. I'm just curious, your own pilgrimage with this book.
Yes.
And just tell us a little bit about your own growing awareness and so on.
Well, as I said, I started trying to teach this in 2006. It was a 2-week course, and people were driven to tears every day. And I was discovering much of this as I was teaching it to them. And people would run out of the room crying. I was in tears every day. And then when I wasn't teaching, I was pinning people like Tom Howard and Malcolm Guite and Joseph Pierce to the table and saying, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? I've talked with Michael Ward, and I gave him my whole spiel at lunch there in Oxford. And I said, what do you think? And he said, well, there's so much to say. And then he left for a week. And I've had many combatants and friends who have challenged me on this, but I think that what I'm seeing is not what I want to see, but that intolerable compliment. And as I try to delve deep into the book, as I take Michael Ward's idea of the kappa element of Lewis's secrecy, Ruth Pitter, I just read this week, called Lewis a very oystery man, right? Would he hide the four loves in his last work of fiction? Well, of course he would. And that seems to gather the unity that we feel is in Lewis. And so that the idea would be about love makes sense, and all of a sudden helps Lewis to cohere in a way that I'd never seen him cohere before. In the meantime, I grapple in my own adult life with that fact, with grief and falling in love and getting married and trying to love friends well. And so as I've sought out Lewis and sharpened my intellectual skills, I've also tried haltingly to sharpen my soul skills as well, and to come to grips with the intolerable complement of God's love, which I think is the center of the universe and is certainly the greatest of both commandments.
You can go first. It's a very interesting thesis, and I'll think about it for a long time. But I was wondering, are you aware in the 16th century literature of other authors who had a similar sort of, the threads of interest to them were the warp and woof of their pieces, and they continued to be that as they wrote more and more? Was this a medieval literature technique?
The technique of writing coherently as one author?
Ideas popping up again and again in new works.
I think any good author does it, and I think that any human life does it. You know, if you walk with somebody, you hear them saying the same things. I don't think Lewis is unique by having the same kinds of things come up. I think, though, he is unique in the way that there is, well, I don't know if I would say unique, in the way that he coheres. But having read a bunch of different authors and a lot by them, although there's a similarity of tone. I mean, I've read everything of Steinbeck's many, many, many times, and there are certainly recurrent ideas. But the coherence of them, and then there's a great essay that I didn't have time to quote. It's called Variation in Shakespeare and Others. Okay, Shakespeare would explain, would use this metaphor, and then he'd try another metaphor, and then he'd try another metaphor, and he'd get all around it to try and describe it. I think that Lewis, in describing Shakespeare's method of variation, is using that method of variation because his first scholarly work is The Allegory of Love, right? And he's trying to get to that idea all of his life. I think it's significant that the last fiction he writes is Till We Have Faces. And Joy Davidman's love poetry to C.S. Lewis stops at the end of 1954. He tries to write a story about Queen Helen, but doesn't really get there. And so I think that he's kind of fulfilled in some ways his apostolate, and I think he tosses it out, and I think that's why it's his great disappointment with the critics. I think if you read this book right, it's very clearly the gospel account. And by the way, Psyche, the human soul, marries Eros, who is the god of love, who himself is the son of the god of love. Where else do you hear about the human soul having a bridegroom who is the son of the god of love? I hear it every Sunday. I don't know about you. I think that Lewis is telling this story to try and get the gospel out in as clear a way as he, with his complexity, knows how. And he kind of buries it and waits for everybody to go, ah. And they don't get it, kind of like the Narnias and the planets. And so I think this underlying structure of the four loves, and he starts, by the way, writing about the four loves as soon as he starts publishing Christian books. Problem of Pain comes out in 1940, and in 1940 there's a letter to warning, and he enumerates all four of the four loves. He's thinking about the loves individually much earlier than that, but he's talking about the four loves from 1940 on. And so I think that it kind of undergirds all of his Christian writing. And if nothing else, he's trying to help us see more clearly so that we can see the love of God. So, yeah, he's not alone in doing it, but I think that he's masterful in doing it. And I think that if we read that book aright, it will be a masterpiece on the level of something that Milton or Shakespeare did. I think once we get it, maybe he hit it too well. But line upon line leads to that. And I'd be interested in hearing back from you once you reread the book. Yeah, Wayne.
Chad Walsh wrote a book called C.S. Lewis, Apostle to the Skeptics, and I wonder if you would comment on the conclusion of Till We Have Faces and the instruction to give this book to someone from the Greek lands and how that might play in as an interpretive key to the kind of comment you just made, that Lewis is trying to reach the otherwise unreachable with the gospel.
Yes, absolutely. This book was all written by Queen Orual of Glome. If any stranger who intends the journey to Greece finds this book, let him take it to Greece with him, for that is what she seems mostly to have desired. And then at the beginning she says, I write in Greek. It may someday happen that a traveler from the Greek lands will again lodge in this palace and read the book. Then he will talk of it among the Greeks, where there is great freedom of speech, even about the gods themselves. Perhaps their wise men will know whether my complaint is right, or whether the god could have defended himself if he had made an answer. If it had made its way to Greece, then we wouldn't have needed Paul to tell us who the unknown God was. If this book had made it to Greece, we would have known that it's the God of love. So I think that, yes, this intention is to put that in the information central. It's like dropping it in CNN, right, or dropping it on the internet. If it goes to Greece, it will disseminate, because our New Testament is not written in Aramaic, which our Lord spoke. It's written in Greek, in Koine Greek, so those ideas could spread. And I think that there's this impulse to kind of grapple with this. And that impulse starts even before she's willing to write the honest part about the gods. So, and I think she really is looking for a hearer and looking for a judge between gods and men. And she's not going to find it until St. Paul comes and says, here's the unknown God, let me proclaim him to you. Here's the judge between gods and men. I think it would fit right nicely into, and it's all in Plato now, isn't it? We'll get we want to have it for the recording.
Thank you. Was there a certain point in the book where you realized that Oral was being dishonest, or that she was deceived? Could you explain what that moment was in the book?
Yeah. It's the key scene. She's marching up the mountain, and she's going to bury Orual, or bury Psyche. And she hears this voice in her head, and it says, "Why should your heart not dance?" My heart to dance? My, the ugly sister, to be cast out when I had to. But for a moment, I almost answered, why not? This mad foolishness, this invitation to joy. It's an invitation to joy, right? And she had to govern herself. She had to rule herself like a queen. I queened it very well. And she had to tell over like a lesson why her heart should not dance. And so she quashes this idea of joy. And a few moments later, an hour or two later, she meets Psyche, and Psyche's alive. But I think her saying no to joy is saying no to faith. She never, in all of her rant against why her heart had no reason to dance, never once stopped to say, I'm sorry, who's speaking? That's not some kind of, suppressed psychic impulse in her. She's not a dancer. She's not a rejoicer. She relishes how ugly she is and how terrible she has it. Why should your heart not dance? Cannot come from within her. It must come from outside. And she never stops to say, who's speaking? By the way, an hour later, Orual says to her, or Psyche says to her, Orual, why should our hearts not dance? And she just misses it, ignores it. Psyche, the bride of Eros, unified one with the son of the god of love, invites her to dance, and she blows it by again. So she refuses this invitation to joy and does not see the palace. Sees her in rags because she's refused joy. This refusal to receive joy is a no to faith. And faith is the key to sight, as we see with Lucy, right? There's that marvelous scene in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in the movie. The best thing I think that they got was, it's not in the book, she swings her feet over, and instead of putting on her slippers, she puts on her boots to try to get back into Narnia again. She shoes herself in preparation for the gospel of peace, right? She gets ready to go into the wardrobe. It's faith. That's not in the book, okay? She prepares herself for faith. Sight and faith are there together. In Weeping Bay, this dejected priest who leaves this little French-Canadian fishing village, leaves it despairing that anything will ever change, goes up the mountain to catch his bus, goes up this hill, and he sees a little shrine to the Virgin, and he kneels before the stone goddess of the Virgin, and he looks up and sees the living face of Christ. He kneels before a stone goddess and sees a living God. He kneels before Ungit and hears Ungit's son. And Christ invites him to joy. And he refuses and gets on the bus, it says, visionless forever. He says no to joy and loses his vision. Orual says no to joy and cannot see Psyche's palace, which is there. As soon as she gets on her knees, she sees it. Is it really there? Of course it is. Is she really in finery? Of course she is. Is it really a golden goblet? Of course it is. But she has said no to joy. You know why? She will not be taken in, just like the dwarfs at the end of the last battle, who will not be taken in. They get into God's country, Aslan's country. They're fed food, and he says, it's straw and dung. They have refused vision, and there's only so much that God can do. If you say no to joy, you say no to sight. No to faith, no to sight, and you can't see it. That's the key moment. And I'm like, she's lying to us. She's lying to us. So,
With all of that, could you comment on her stabbing her arm and Psyche's response?
what are you trying to get at?
I just want to hear your response. I'm not trying to get anything. I'm just enjoying this, and I want to hear your response.
The question was, can I respond to, so Joy sees Psyche, assumes that she is being deluded by the brute who she's forbidden to see him at night, except at night. She's forbidden to actually see him. And she's coached by the way, when she goes back to talk to the fox and Bardia, she tells them everything except the fact that she saw the palace. She's lying. She's lying to them. Had she told them that, they would have had an entirely different answer. And they probably would have gone and seen the palace. So she's swallowed the lie. So then they say, well, if there's no palace, then she must be deluded. We better go rescue her. And so she sets off on a rescue mission, and she stabs herself through her arm and has this wound that will bleed out in a few moments. And she says, if you don't go and reveal his face, the face of this brute, I'll kill myself. And because Psyche has more storge for Orual than she has eros for eros, because the claims of love are more ancient, because Orual has been the only mother she ever knew. Orual knew exactly where to play it, and don't those people who love us know just where to hurt us and just where to force their will upon us? And she said, I wish that you had stabbed me. I wish you had killed me. But the threat to kill yourself is the effective one. You knew where to drive the blade in. And so Psyche goes and takes the oil lamp, you know it from the old myth of Cupid and Psyche, leans in on him in the dark, and he is so beautiful that she leans down and a drop of hot oil touches his shoulder, and he wakes up and sees that she's been disobedient. So he banishes her to these impossible tasks, and she goes wailing off, and she hears echoes of the wailing for the rest of her life. But then psychically she suffers. She has these dreams, and she pays the price. And when she sees Psyche, Psyche has managed to complete the tasks, but she's completed the tasks because Orual did the work. Another bore nearly all the anguish. Not a bad sentence for us during Lent as we look forward to Good Friday. Psyche was certainly a Christ figure, but Orual served as Christ too. Orual paid the price of anguish. She inflicted great anguish, but then she paid the price of great anguish. And even that selfish offering was offered as a kind of sacrifice. And that's where redemption comes in. It's what turned me around as a fundamentalist years and years ago. I used to have the stingy view of God, where God was like keeping heaven for anybody, for just those, of his favorites. But when I read The Great Divorce, I realized that God will thrust heaven on anyone who will stand for it. And Orual herself cannot exempt herself from the love of God. And she sees it, and she bows, and she worships. It overcomes her. Yeah. Yeah, one more? Yes.
You've made a lengthy case for what this book is for. Mm-hmm. Is this not as much against modernity, enlightenment, Lewis sort of screaming at the gods of this age?
Is it against modernity? See, that's part of the thesis. If I had another slide in a half an hour, and the kind of critical statement that I'll make is that Till We Have Faces is a piece of my key argument that Lewis and Tolkien were doing canonical modernism. Modernists were interested in language, despair, the city, mythology, everything that modernists were about, Lewis and Tolkien were about, and they lost the battle in their day, but they're winning the war because how many of you read James Joyce again for pleasure? I'm stealing a line from Tom Shippey. But we read The Lord of the Rings, the return of the king. Where does the king return to? He returns to the city. Oriol restores the city. Auden writes poems about the city and dedicates them to Charles Williams and the image of the city. The streaming into the city of the wasteland. You know, Bloom walking around the city. Okay? It's essentially modernist, and that's one of the reasons why I want to get this book out, is because I want to make the case that Lewis and Tolkien were doing modernism. And they were arguing for the way that modernism has kind of fetishized some of its own despair. The modernists don't know what to make of the aerial poems of the four quartets. But that was, Eliot was done with The Wasteland 6 months after he finished it. He wanted more, right? So.
I didn't mean modernism in a literary sense. I meant it as a philosophical enlightenment sense.
So then I'll need to, yeah.
Like so he writes this in prose, but he goes, oh, darn it, they're not getting it, and so he tells it mythologically. To subvert this need for rationalism. The Greek is continually feeding lies to the character, and she buys the lie, and oh, can we send this to the Greeks that those pagan rationalists will finally get it? In that sense.
I think he's trying to have some play in kind of some of those ideas. I think that he's really kind of trying to get the message across. And that's part of his mission in Cambridge, was to fight against Leavis and some of those others. And I think that his great disappointment was that people kind of didn't catch what was happening. But I think that properly considered, a revision of that might, I think it at least belongs in the dialogue, of what's going on. So it's a poor answer to your question. Maybe we can follow up afterwards. Thank you very much for your patience and your time.